The overlooked defenders. In a galaxy far from Earth, a delicate peace existed between powerful civilizations. Among them was the Alliance of the Stars, a mighty coalition of various species known for their advanced technology and military might. Their latest target was a strategically crucial planet called Helios, known for its resources and strategic position. The Alliance was confident. They had amassed a massive fleet and assembled an enormous army for the invasion. Their commanders and generals were certain that nothing could stop them. Among their many targets, the smallest was Earth, a planet they had dismissed as insignificant. They knew of its inhabitants, but their soldiers had little regard for the human military force, which was small compared to the vast Alliance army. On Earth, in a hidden base far from prying eyes, the human soldiers were busy preparing for the inevitable clash. These were not just ordinary troops. They were a small, elite force known for their extraordinary skills and courage. Despite their numbers, they had proven their mettle in numerous covert operations, but their reputation had not yet reached the ears of the Alliance. Captain Mark Reynolds, the leader of this small but formidable unit, stood at the edge of the base's command center. He surveyed his troops with a determined gaze. His soldiers, clad in advanced armor and equipped with cutting-edge weaponry, moved with purpose and precision. They were ready, but the challenge ahead was daunting. The Alliance had underestimated them. The intelligence reports the Alliance received portrayed the human military as outdated and under-equipped. They had laughed when they saw the reports about the tiny army Earth could muster. How could such a small force stand up to their grand invasion? They were about to find out. In the Alliance's command ship, the mood was one of arrogance and confidence. General Zara, a seasoned commander with a reputation for ruthless efficiency, addressed her assembled officers. Our scouts have reported that the human forces are minimal. We have nothing to worry about. Their defenses are weak compared to ours. We will crush them easily. The officers nodded in agreement, their faces filled with smirks and scorn. To them, the humans were a mere footnote in their grand campaign. They had no idea of the true capabilities of the soldiers they were about to face. Back on Earth, the mood was very different. Captain Reynolds knew the stakes were high. He called his team to a briefing room where they gathered, their faces serious. He knew that the Alliance's confidence could be their greatest weapon against them. If his team could turn the Alliance's arrogance into a disadvantage, they might just have a chance. "Listen up, everyone," Reynolds began, his voice steady. "The Alliance thinks they're going to waltz in here and defeat us without breaking a sweat. They've underestimated us, and that's going to work to our advantage. We've trained for this moment, and we know our planet better than anyone." His words were met with nods of agreement. Each member of his team had undergone rigorous training, learning to use the terrain to their advantage and employing tactics that were unconventional but highly effective. They were experts in guerrilla warfare, and their small numbers allowed them to move swiftly and strike with precision. As the invasion day approached, Reynolds and his team continued their preparations. They set traps, fortified their positions, and conducted drills. They knew that their strategy needed to be flawless. Every detail had to be perfect to turn the tide of battle. The Alliance continued their march toward Helios, their enormous fleet cutting through space with overwhelming power. The ships were sleek and imposing, a symbol of their technological superiority. On board, the Alliance officers reviewed their plans, confident in their impending victory. Meanwhile, on Helios, the human soldiers moved with quiet determination. They knew that the battle ahead would be tough, but they were prepared. They had faced impossible odds before and had come out victorious. They were determined to do it again. Captain Reynolds gathered his team one last time before the battle began. "Remember, we're not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for our planet, for everyone back home. We have the skills, the training, and the willpower to turn this around." They laughed at us, but they won't be laughing for long. The soldiers responded with cheers, their spirits high despite the gravity of the situation. They were ready to face whatever came their way. The Alliance's arrogance was about to meet the fierce resolve of humanity. As the Alliance's ships loomed closer, the human defenders took their positions. The time for laughter was over. They had been underestimated, but that was their strength. The tiny army was ready to show that even the smallest force could stand against the mightiest adversary. The stage was set for a battle that would prove the true worth of the so-called tiny army. The Alliance was about to learn that underestimating humanity could be their greatest mistake. Preparing for battle. The sky over Helios darkened as the massive fleet of the Alliance of the Stars approached. The enormous ships glided through space, their engines humming with power, and their weapons ready for action. On the surface of Helios, a small but determined force of human soldiers prepared for the fight of their lives. In a hidden underground base, Captain Mark Reynolds and his team were deep in their preparations. The base was a hive of activity, with soldiers moving quickly between various stations. The atmosphere was charged with a mix of tension and resolve. The tiny army knew they had a formidable challenge ahead, but they were determined to rise to it. Captain Reynolds paced the command center, his eyes scanning the holographic map of the battlefield. The map showed the positions of the Alliance's fleet and the terrain of Helios. Reynolds was focused, knowing that every detail mattered. The survival of their planet depended on their ability to turn the Alliance's confidence into a weakness. "All right, team," Reynolds said, gathering his soldiers for a briefing. "The Alliance is coming in with everything they've got. We've got to be ready for anything they throw at us. Our advantage is that we know this planet better than they ever could. We'll use that to our advantage." His words were met with determined nods. The soldiers, though few in number, had trained rigorously for this moment. They were not just fighters. They were experts in guerrilla warfare, skilled in using their environment to their benefit. Private Lisa Rodriguez, one of the most skilled members of the team, was busy checking and rechecking her equipment. Her hands moved with practiced precision as she ensured that her weapons and gear were in perfect condition. She knew that even the smallest mistake could cost lives in the coming battle. Nearby, Sergeant Tom Nguyen worked on setting up traps and fortifying positions. The traps were designed to be both hidden and deadly, using the natural terrain to ensnare and disable the invaders. Nguyen's experience in engineering and field tactics made him the ideal person for this job. His focus was absolute as he arranged each trap with care. In another part of the base, Specialist Emma Clark and her team were setting up communication arrays. Clear and secure communication was crucial for coordinating their movements during the battle. Clark worked efficiently, ensuring that the signals would be strong and reliable, no matter where the soldiers were on the planet. As the final hours before the battle ticked away, the soldiers gathered for a final briefing. Captain Reynolds stood before them, his face serious but filled with confidence. He knew his team was ready, but he needed to reinforce the importance of their mission. "We've been preparing for this moment for a long time," Reynolds began. "We've trained hard, and we know what we're capable of. The Alliance thinks they can just walk over us, but they're about to find out they're wrong. We have the skills, the strategy, and the willpower to make them regret underestimating us." The soldiers responded with a cheer, their spirits high despite the gravity of the situation. Each one knew their role and was ready to carry it out. They had trained for every possible scenario, and were prepared to adapt as the situation unfolded. The sun set over Helios, casting long shadows across the terrain. The human soldiers took their positions, each one carefully placed to make the most of the natural landscape. They were hidden, but their eyes were sharp and their senses alert. They knew that the Alliance's arrival was imminent. Captain Reynolds moved among his troops, offering encouragement and checking that everything was in place. His presence was a source of strength for the soldiers, and his confidence helped to bolster their own. "Remember," Reynolds said, "our strength lies in our ability to adapt and surprise them. They think they know what to expect, but we're going to show them just how wrong they are." As night fell, the base fell silent except for the occasional murmur of the soldiers preparing for the battle ahead. The quiet was punctuated by the distant sound of the approaching Alliance fleet, a constant reminder of the challenge they faced. The soldiers took a moment to reflect on their situation. They were a small force against a massive army, but they had something the Alliance didn't: the element of surprise. They had been underestimated, and that was their greatest advantage. As the stars shone brightly above, the soldiers of Earth were ready. They had prepared for every possible scenario and had equipped themselves with the best tactics and technology they could muster. They knew that the coming battle would test them like never before, but they were ready to face it head-on. Captain Reynolds took one last look at the battlefield map and then turned to his team. "It's time. Get to your positions and get ready. We're about to show them what humanity can do when pushed to the edge." The soldiers moved into their positions, their hearts pounding with anticipation. The Alliance's fleet was close, and the moment of truth was at hand. The tiny army of humans was ready to face their formidable adversaries, determined to turn the tables and prove that even the smallest force could make a big difference. The battle for Helios was about to begin, and the Alliance was about to learn the hard way that underestimating humanity could be their greatest mistake. The invasion starts. The vast Alliance fleet hung above Helios like a swarm of menacing dark clouds. The massive ships, sleek and menacing, began their descent toward the planet's surface. The Alliance's invasion had begun, and their confidence was palpable. Below, on the surface of Helios, the human defenders prepared for the storm that was about to hit. Captain Mark Reynolds and his team were in their positions, hidden among the natural landscape. The humans had planned for this moment, using every advantage the terrain offered. They lay low, their breathing steady, their eyes fixed on the approaching enemy. From their vantage point, the soldiers could see the Alliance's landing craft touching down in various locations. The Alliance's forces disembarked in large numbers, their heavy armor and advanced weapons making them look formidable. The soldiers of the Alliance marched with precision, confident that their overwhelming numbers would quickly crush any resistance. The first contact came sooner than expected. The human soldiers had set up traps in key locations, and as the Alliance troops advanced, they triggered the first wave of hidden explosives. The blasts were powerful but controlled, sending debris and dust into the air. The Alliance soldiers stumbled, confused and disoriented. Captain Reynolds watched through binoculars, a determined expression on his face. He could see the chaos spreading among the invaders. The humans' initial strike had been effective, but this was just the beginning. Reynolds knew that the real battle had only just started. "Hold your fire," Reynolds ordered his team through the communication channel. "Let them come closer. We need to make sure the next wave hits its mark." The soldiers followed orders, their fingers hovering over their weapons, but not yet firing. They waited, eyes locked on the approaching Alliance forces. The initial explosions had caused a shift in the enemy's tactics, making them more cautious. They started to spread out, scanning for any more traps. In the midst of the confusion, Private Lisa Rodriguez and Sergeant Tom Nguyen prepared their next set of traps. They worked quickly, their hands moving efficiently as they set up concealed explosive devices and tripwires. Their training had prepared them for this, and they executed their tasks with precision. The Alliance, now aware that they were facing unexpected resistance, began to deploy their advanced sensors and drones. They were searching for the source of the attacks, trying to pinpoint where the humans were hiding. The drones flew over the battlefield, their sensors scanning the ground below. Specialist Emma Clark and her team had anticipated this move. They had set up electronic countermeasures to jam the Alliance's sensors and disrupt their communication. The drones buzzed and wobbled as their signals were scrambled, causing more frustration among the invaders. As the battle raged on, the Alliance forces began to regroup. They brought in heavy artillery and started to bombard the areas where they suspected the human soldiers might be hiding. The explosions shook the ground, sending shockwaves through the area. The human soldiers, well trained in survival, took cover and waited for the right moment to strike back. Despite the heavy bombardment, the human defenders remained calm and focused. They knew that their tactics depended on patience and precision. When the Alliance's artillery fire began to wane, the human soldiers emerged from their cover and launched a counterattack. The small but highly skilled human force used their guerrilla tactics to their advantage. They struck swiftly, targeting the Alliance's supply lines and vulnerable positions. The surprise attacks were swift and deadly, causing confusion and disarray among the invaders. Captain Reynolds coordinated the attacks with precision, directing his troops to hit key targets and then retreating before the Alliance could mount a counteroffensive. The humans were elusive and difficult to pin down, their knowledge of the terrain giving them a significant advantage. The Alliance leaders, watching the chaos unfold, were beginning to lose their composure. General Zara, who had been so confident just hours earlier, now found herself grappling with the reality of the situation. Her forces were being picked apart by an enemy they had underestimated. "Damn it," Zara shouted in frustration. "Why aren't we making progress? Find those humans and crush them." The Alliance's efforts to locate and neutralize the human forces only led to more frustration. The humans were always one step ahead, using their knowledge of the planet to outmaneuver their larger and better-equipped foes. As night fell over Helios, the battle continued with no clear victor. The Alliance's initial confidence had been replaced by frustration and uncertainty. The humans, though outnumbered, had managed to inflict significant damage and disrupt the invaders' plans. Captain Reynolds and his team regrouped, their faces showing the strain of battle, but also a fierce determination. They knew that the first day had been only the start, but their successful defense had proven their worth. The tiny army of humans had made their presence felt, and the Alliance was starting to realize that they were not as invincible as they had believed. The invasion had begun, but the battle was far from over. The humans had shown that they were a force to be reckoned with, and the Alliance would need to rethink their approach if they hoped to succeed. The tiny army had begun to turn the tide, and the true test of their strength was just beginning. Turning the tide. As the battle for Helios continued into its second day, the small human force was starting to make a significant impact. The Alliance of the Stars, initially confident of an easy victory, was now facing an unexpected challenge. The tiny army of humans had turned the tide, and their resilience was beginning to show. In a makeshift command center hidden beneath the surface of Helios, Captain Mark Reynolds and his team gathered to strategize their next move. The room was lit by the dim glow of tactical screens and illuminated maps. Despite the heavy strain of the ongoing battle, the team's morale was high. They had managed to inflict considerable damage on the Alliance and disrupt their plans, but they knew the fight was far from over. "We've done well so far," Reynolds said, his voice steady, "but we need to keep up the pressure. The Alliance is starting to regroup, and we can't let them get their footing." Private Lisa Rodriguez, who had been monitoring enemy movements, spoke up. "The Alliance has started to deploy more advanced sensors and drones. They're trying to pinpoint our positions and neutralize our traps. We need to stay ahead of them." Sergeant Tom Nguyen nodded in agreement. "I've got more traps ready, but we should also consider hitting their supply lines. Disrupting their resources will slow them down and give us an edge." Specialist Emma Clark added, "I've been working on improving our electronic countermeasures. If we can jam their communications and sensors more effectively, we can keep them off balance." Reynolds gave a determined nod. "Excellent. Let's execute a multi-pronged strategy. We'll continue with guerrilla tactics, but we'll also launch a coordinated attack on their supply lines. Emma, work on enhancing our countermeasures. Tom, set up additional traps around the supply routes. Lisa, keep tracking their movements and let us know if they change tactics." The team sprang into action, each member focused on their specific tasks. The human soldiers were well coordinated, their movements precise and purposeful. They knew that their ability to adapt and respond quickly was crucial in this fight. As the day progressed, the humans launched a series of surprise attacks on the Alliance's supply lines. The Alliance, already stretched thin and struggling to regain control, found their resources increasingly compromised. The supply convoys, crucial for maintaining their large-scale operations, were ambushed and destroyed by the skilled human soldiers. The destruction of the supply lines had an immediate impact. The Alliance's soldiers began to experience shortages in ammunition, food, and medical supplies. Frustration and confusion spread among their ranks, making them more vulnerable to further attacks. Captain Reynolds led a daring raid on one of the Alliance's command centers. Under the cover of darkness, his team infiltrated the facility, using their knowledge of the terrain to bypass security. The raid was swift and efficient, targeting key communication hubs and data storage. The operation was a success, and the Alliance's ability to coordinate their forces was severely disrupted. Without reliable communication, the Alliance struggled to respond to the dynamic tactics of the human defenders. Back at their base, the human soldiers regrouped and assessed the results of their recent operations. The atmosphere was tense but hopeful. They had achieved significant victories, but the fight was far from over. Captain Reynolds addressed his team once more. "We've made progress, but we need to stay focused. The Alliance is a powerful enemy, and they won't give up easily. We've shown them that we're a force to be reckoned with, but we need to keep pushing." Private Lisa Rodriguez, her face illuminated by the glow of a monitor, replied, "The Alliance is trying to adapt to our tactics. They're deploying more countermeasures and reinforcing their positions. We'll need to stay one step ahead." Sergeant Tom Nguyen added, "I've set up more traps and fortified our positions. We should be ready for their next push." Specialist Emma Clark updated the team on the electronic countermeasures. "I've managed to disrupt their communications even further. They're having trouble coordinating their movements." As night fell, the battle continued with renewed intensity. The Alliance, now aware that their initial strategy had failed, began to adapt their tactics. They launched a series of coordinated attacks, attempting to recapture lost ground and regain control over their supply lines. The human defenders, though weary, remained resilient. They used their knowledge of the terrain and their guerrilla tactics to repel the Alliance's advances. Each skirmish was a testament to their determination and skill. The tide of the battle had turned, and the Alliance was beginning to understand that their victory was not as certain as they had once believed. The small human force, though outnumbered, had proven their ability to fight back effectively and disrupt even the most advanced enemy operations. Captain Reynolds watched the battle unfold, a mixture of pride and resolve in his eyes. The humans had managed to turn the tide, but they knew that the ultimate victory was still ahead. The fight for Helios was far from over, but the small army of humans had shown that even the smallest force could make a monumental difference. As the night continued, the battle raged on. The Alliance was beginning to realize that underestimating humanity was a grave mistake. The small army had proven their worth, and the struggle for Helios was far from finished. The true test of their strength and resolve was yet to come. The Alliance's desperation. The battle for Helios had been raging for days. The small but fierce human force continued to disrupt and resist the much larger alliance of the stars. The tide of the battle had turned in favor of the humans, and the Alliance's once confident leaders were now growing desperate. In their command ship, General Zera paced back and forth, her face etched with frustration. The holographic display in front of her showed the ongoing chaos on the planet's surface. Her initial plan had been to overwhelm the human defenders with sheer numbers, but the humans had proven to be far more resourceful and resilient than anticipated. "We need to regain control," Zara said, her voice tight with frustration. "Our forces are being stretched too thin. We can't afford to lose this planet." Her chief strategist, Commander Ryle, stepped forward with a worried expression. "General, our supply lines are still compromised, and our attempts to locate the human forces have been thwarted by their countermeasures. We're having difficulty coordinating our attacks." Zora's eyes narrowed. "We need a new plan. If we don't crush these humans soon, we risk losing everything we've gained. Increase the pressure. Use every available resource." In response, the Alliance began to escalate their efforts. They launched a series of heavy assaults on the human positions, sending wave after wave of soldiers to overwhelm the defenders. The attacks were relentless, and the once quiet base of the humans was now a hive of activity as they prepared to fend off the renewed onslaught. Captain Mark Reynolds and his team had anticipated the Alliance's desperate measures. They had been preparing for this escalation, fortifying their positions and setting up additional traps. The atmosphere was tense, but the human soldiers were determined. They knew that their ability to withstand the Alliance's pressure was crucial to their survival. As the Alliance's forces advanced, Private Lisa Rodriguez and Sergeant Tom Nguyen coordinated their defense. They utilized every advantage they had, using the terrain to create choke points and funnel the invaders into carefully planned ambushes. Their training and experience allowed them to adapt quickly to the changing conditions of the battlefield. Specialist Emma Clark worked tirelessly to maintain the electronic countermeasures. The Alliance had increased their efforts to counter the disruptions, deploying specialized equipment to try to bypass the jamming. Clark's team worked with equal intensity, tweaking their technology to stay ahead of the Alliance's advancements. Despite the heightened pressure, the human defenders managed to hold their ground. The Alliance's attacks, though fierce, were met with effective resistance. The human soldiers fought with a combination of skill and determination that left the invaders struggling to make significant progress. The general's frustration grew as her forces faced one setback after another. Her once unshakable confidence was now clouded by the realization that the humans were not only holding their own, but also managing to inflict substantial damage. "Damn it!" Zora exclaimed in frustration. "We're running out of time and resources. If we don't break through soon, we'll have to consider a full retreat." Commander Ryle tried to remain calm. "We still have some reserves, General. We can try a final push, but we'll need to be very precise. Any mistakes could be disastrous." Zara nodded, her face set with grim determination. "Prepare for a final assault. Deploy our best units and make sure they have everything they need. We need to crush the human resistance once and for all." The Alliance's final push was intense and all-encompassing. The invaders concentrated their forces in a massive offensive, sending wave after wave of soldiers and heavy equipment against the human positions. The ground shook with the impact of explosions, and the air was filled with the roar of combat. Captain Reynolds and his team were at the heart of the defense. They coordinated their efforts with precision, directing their troops and utilizing every available resource. The battle was fierce, and the human defenders fought with everything they had. Despite their best efforts, the sheer scale of the Alliance's assault began to take its toll. The human soldiers were stretched thin, their resources and energy dwindling. Captain Reynolds could see that the situation was becoming increasingly dire, but he refused to give in. "We hold our ground," Reynolds shouted to his team. "We've come too far to back down now. Keep fighting and stay focused." As the battle reached its climax, the Alliance's desperation became evident. The once confident invaders were now facing a situation they had not anticipated. The human defenders had proven to be an unyielding force, and the Alliance was beginning to realize that victory was slipping from their grasp. In the command ship, General Zara watched in disbelief as her forces struggled against the determined human defenders. Her plans had failed, and the realization of defeat was becoming undeniable. "We've underestimated them," Zara said, her voice heavy with frustration. "These humans are not just a nuisance. They're a formidable opponent." The battle for Helios continued, with the human defenders holding strong against the Alliance's final assault. The invaders' desperation was clear, and the humans had proven their ability to turn the tide against even the most powerful of foes. As the dust settled on the battlefield, it was clear that the small human force had managed to defy the odds once again. The Alliance's attempt to crush the resistance had failed, and the struggle for Helios was far from over. The human defenders had shown that they were a force to be reckoned with, and the Alliance's desperation was a testament to their resilience and strength. The final stand. The battle for Helios had reached its critical moment. The Alliance of the Stars, after days of fierce fighting, was now making its last desperate attempt to secure victory. The once confident invaders were battered and bruised, their initial arrogance replaced by a grim determination. For the small human force, it was time for a final stand. Captain Mark Reynolds and his team gathered in their command center, a small but well-protected bunker beneath the planet's surface. The walls were lined with maps and tactical displays, and the atmosphere was tense. The humans had held their ground through countless assaults, but they knew that the Alliance was preparing for a decisive push. "All right, everyone," Reynolds said, his voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "This is it. The Alliance is going all in, and we need to be ready. Our goal is to hold them off as long as possible and make sure they know they're facing a force they underestimated." Private Lisa Rodriguez, her face lined with exhaustion but resolute, nodded. "We've fortified our positions and set up additional traps. The Alliance will have to fight for every inch." Sergeant Tom Nguyen, busy checking equipment, added, "Our supply lines are tight, and we're ready to respond to any breach. We'll give them everything we've got." Specialist Emma Clark, working on electronic countermeasures, looked up with a determined expression. "I've adjusted our jamming equipment to counter their latest sensors. We'll keep them guessing and disrupt their communication as much as possible." The final assault began just before dawn. The Alliance's forces, now focused and determined, launched their most coordinated attack yet. The ground shook with the force of their bombardments, and the air was filled with the roar of heavy artillery. The human positions were once again under intense pressure. Captain Reynolds and his team watched from their command center, their eyes fixed on the monitors showing the battlefield. The Alliance's massive assault was relentless, and the human defenders faced wave after wave of invaders. The fighting was fierce, and every inch of ground was contested. The humans fought with every ounce of strength they had. They used their knowledge of the terrain to their advantage, setting traps and launching counterattacks. Despite their best efforts, the sheer scale of the Alliance's offensive began to push them back. Private Lisa Rodriguez took her position at a choke point, her weapon steady as she aimed at the advancing Alliance soldiers. "They're pushing hard," she said, her voice tense. "We need to hold this line." Sergeant Tom Nguyen moved through the battlefield, directing his team and ensuring that their defenses remained strong. "Keep pushing them back. We can't let them break through." Specialist Emma Clark's fingers flew over the control panel as she worked to maintain the electronic countermeasures. The Alliance had deployed advanced technology to counter their jamming, but Clark was determined to keep their communication disrupted. The battle was a grueling test of endurance and resolve. The human defenders, though exhausted, continued to fight with unwavering determination. Each soldier knew that the fate of Helios rested on their shoulders. As the day wore on, the Alliance's assault began to lose its momentum. The continuous pressure had taken its toll, and the invaders were starting to show signs of fatigue. The human defenders, though battered, had managed to hold their positions and inflict significant damage on the Alliance's forces. Captain Reynolds knew that this was their chance. "We're holding them off, but we need to push back, launch a counteroffensive, and hit their weak spots." The human soldiers, driven by their determination and the leadership of their captain, launched a coordinated counterattack. They struck at the Alliance's supply lines and command centers, causing further disruption and confusion among the invaders. The Alliance, already struggling, was thrown into further disarray. Their once unbreakable assault was now faltering, and the human defenders' counterattacks were having a significant impact. The tide of the battle had turned once again, and the Alliance's desperation was palpable. General Zara, watching from her command ship, could see the situation slipping from her control. Her forces were exhausted, and the human defenders had proven to be a formidable opponent. The realization of defeat was becoming increasingly clear. "Withdraw," Zara ordered, her voice filled with frustration and resignation. "We've underestimated these humans. We need to regroup and rethink our strategy." The Alliance's forces began to retreat, their once mighty assault collapsing under the relentless resistance of the human defenders. The battlefield, once filled with the sounds of combat, was now marked by the retreat of the invaders. Captain Reynolds and his team stood amidst the wreckage, their faces showing the weariness of battle, but also a fierce pride. They had held their ground and pushed back the Alliance's final assault. The victory was hard-earned and came at a great cost, but it was a testament to the strength and resolve of the human defenders. The battle for Helios had been a fierce and challenging struggle, but the small human force had proven that they could defy the odds and emerge victorious. As the sun set over the battlefield, the human defenders surveyed the aftermath of the battle. The Alliance's retreat marked the end of a grueling fight, but the true cost of the victory was still being realized. The struggle for Helios had shown that even the smallest force could make a monumental difference. The final stand had been a defining moment, and the human soldiers had demonstrated their unwavering courage and determination. The battle for Helios was over, but the lessons learned and the bravery displayed would be remembered for years to come. The aftermath. The battle for Helios had come to an end. The Alliance of the Stars had retreated, their once mighty force scattered and defeated. The battlefield was now quiet, the sounds of war replaced by the soft hum of recovery efforts. For the small human force, the aftermath was a time of reflection and rebuilding. Captain Mark Reynolds surveyed the damage from the command center, his face a mix of relief and exhaustion. The base, once bustling with the chaos of battle, was now a hive of activity as the human soldiers worked to assess the damage and tend to their wounded. "Captain, we've got a situation," Private Lisa Rodriguez said, approaching with a concerned look. "The supply lines have been hit hard, and we're running low on medical supplies. We need to prioritize resupply and recovery." Reynolds nodded, his expression serious. "I'm on it. We need to make sure our wounded get the care they need, and that our supplies are replenished. The last thing we need is to run out of essential resources now." Sergeant Tom Nguyen was already coordinating the logistics. "I've got teams working on the repairs and getting the supply lines back up. We're also setting up a temporary medical station to handle the injured." Specialist Emma Clark, who had been busy with the electronic countermeasures during the battle, was now focused on restoring communication and data systems. "I'm working on re-establishing our full network. It'll help us coordinate our recovery efforts and stay connected with our allies." As the human soldiers worked to repair and recover, the scale of their victory began to sink in. The Alliance's retreat was a significant achievement, but it came at a high cost. The battlefield was littered with the remnants of the intense conflict, and the human defenders were left to deal with the aftermath. The wounded were being treated in the temporary medical station set up near the command center. Doctors and medics worked tirelessly, tending to injuries and providing care. The injuries ranged from minor to severe, and the medical team was stretched to its limits. Captain Reynolds made his way through the medical area, offering words of encouragement to the injured and their families. He knew that their recovery was as important as the victory itself. "Hang in there," Reynolds said to one of the injured soldiers. "You're going to get through this. We're all in this together." As the days passed, the human defenders began to regain their strength. The base was gradually repaired, and the supply lines were restored. The soldiers took pride in their achievements, but there was also a sense of somber reflection. They had won, but the cost had been significant. The Alliance's retreat left behind a scene of devastation. The once thriving base was now a landscape of wreckage and damaged equipment. The human soldiers began the process of cleaning up and salvaging what they could. Every piece of debris was a reminder of the intense struggle they have faced. In the command center, Captain Reynolds and his team gathered to discuss the next steps. The victory was significant, but there was still much work to be done. They needed to rebuild, reassess their strategies, and prepare for any future threats. "We've achieved a major victory," Reynolds said, his voice filled with resolve. "But we can't rest on our laurels. We need to ensure that we're prepared for any future challenges and that we learn from this experience." Commander Ryle, who had been observing the aftermath from the Alliance's side, was now a prisoner of war. The once proud commander was now a symbol of the Alliance's defeat. He sat in a makeshift holding area, his expression a mixture of frustration and disbelief. The general's frustration was evident as he met with his subordinates to discuss the failure. "We underestimated these humans," Zara admitted. "Their resilience and resourcefulness have proven to be formidable. We need to reassess our approach and learn from this experience." Back on Helios, the human soldiers began to rebuild their lives and their base. The victory had brought a sense of unity and pride, but there was also a recognition of the sacrifices made. Memorials were erected to honor those who had fallen, and ceremonies were held to celebrate the bravery and resilience of the defenders. The aftermath of the battle was a time of healing and reflection. The human force had shown that even against overwhelming odds, they could stand their ground and achieve victory. The lessons learned from the battle for Helios would shape their future strategies and prepare them for any future challenges. As the sun set over the battlefield, casting a golden light over the remnants of the conflict, the human defenders looked towards the future with renewed determination. They had faced a formidable foe and emerged victorious, and they knew that their strength and unity would be the key to their continued success. The battle for Helios was over, but the spirit of the defenders lived on. Their courage and resolve had been tested, and they had proven themselves to be a force to be reckoned with. The aftermath of the battle was a time to honor their achievements, remember their sacrifices, and prepare for whatever lay ahead.